Today, we are wrestling with something really foundational, I think. It's this magnificent but also deeply frustrating paradox right at the heart of the modern world.
Yeah, it really gets under your skin once you start looking at it.
We're diving into the genesis of systematic rationalism itself. The framework that lets us build bridges, launch rockets, code AI, all of it.
The bedrock of science and technology, really.
Exactly. And we're going to unpack this stunning, rigorously documented fact that this profoundly systematic structure seems to have been built on a profoundly, irrational moment, a vision even.
And that's the fascinating tension we see in the sources, isn't it? René Descartes, the founder of systematic doubt, the guy who gave us the philosophical tools for objectivity.
Right. I think, therefore I am. That Descartes.
That Descartes, he claimed his entire methodological breakthrough, the whole system, came from a moment of, get this, 100% divine certainty.
Okay, so let's unpack that. We've got a pile of sources here detailing Descartes' famous dreams from 1619.
Yes, and we need to contrast that true kind of messy history with the, let's say, slicker popular myth, the version people like Terence McKenna talked about.
And ultimately, we're analyzing this deep fundamental conflict that pops up when modern science tries to, naturalize its own origins.
Yeah, naturalize. Or maybe impose 21st century materialist logic onto something that happened in a very different mental world.
So the mission today is really to analyze how much these foundational scientific breakthroughs seem to depend on these kinds of suppressed mystical or visionary experiences.
And explore the epistemological conflict that happens when the system, the rational method, turns back on its own genesis. It's like it's trying to erase its own birth certificate.
And the big question for you, the listener, is this. If the founders of our scientific models, Descartes, Newton, Einstein, as we'll see, relied on non-rational, maybe even spiritual inputs for their biggest breakthroughs.
And we spent, 400 years basically arguing about how to square the sacred and the secular in those thinkers?
Right, if we can't even agree on that, how are we supposed to approach intelligent machines? AI systems that are incredibly systematic, but also fundamentally inscrutable in some ways.
Especially if AI itself might be heading towards something new that blends logic, and perhaps something else we don't understand yet.
Exactly. It touches on everything. Okay, let's dive in. So let's set the scene. Paint the picture for this night that arguably changed Western philosophy forever.
Okay, it's November 10th, 1619. Descartes is young, just 23.
Wow, only 23.
Yeah, a French soldier serving in a pretty brutal winter campaign with the Habsburg army. This is the very beginning of the 30 Years' War.
So a time of immense upheaval and violence.
Absolutely. And he's quartered in this famous stove-heated room, or probably in Ulm, Germany. The sources specifically mention him being in a state of feverish mental agitation for days leading up to this.
So he wasn't just relaxing by the fire. He was wound up.
Wound up is a good way to put it. Wrestling, perhaps, with the huge intellectual ambition that would soon define his entire life. That context, the environment, the psychological state, it's crucial.
He wasn't just casually musing.
No, definitely not. High tension. And he recorded what happened next in a notebook he called Olympica. It's lost now, mostly, but the title itself.
Olympica, like Mount Olympus.
Yeah.
Divine, sublime origins.
Exactly. He wrote that he was suddenly filled with enthusiasm, and I discovered the foundations of a wonderful science. Mirabilis scientia fundamenta.
And that word, enthusiasm, we have to pause there. That's not just like, I'm excited about this idea.
Not at all. It's a huge, flashing sign pointing straight at the non-rational origin. We're talking the original Greek entheos.
Literally having the God within.
Precisely. For the Hermetic philosophers, the Renaissance thinkers of his time, this meant gnosis, direct spiritual knowledge.
A connection to the divine mind that kind of bypasses normal senses or logic.
Yes. A direct download, if you will. Descartes himself wrote about discovering the semina scientiae, the seeds of knowledge, which he believed were implanted by divine forces. This wasn't calculation. He interpreted it as revelation. Absolute certainty delivered.
And his conviction was total, right? The sources say 100% certainty.
Total. His immediate notes recorded that 100% conviction of the divine origin. He saw the vision as a clear message from the spirit of truth. Spiritus Veritatis.
And what he did next wasn't philosophical, was it? It was religious.
Purely religious. Immediate vows, including a promise to make a pilgrimage to Our Lady of Loreto in Italy.
Which he actually did, right? Years later.
He did. 4 years later, he fulfilled that vow. That's a serious behavioral commitment. It speaks volumes about how transformative he felt the event was.
Okay, so let's get into the dreams themselves. They're pretty bizarre, aren't they? And we only know them secondhand.
Right, mainly through his biographer Adrien Bayet, writing much later in 1691, and some notes compiled by Leibniz, but they're detailed.
The first dream sounds like absolute terror, like a breakdown.
It was chaotic. He described walking through streets haunted by terrifying phantoms, feeling this profound physical weakness, specifically on his right side.
Physical symptoms.
Yeah, and being spun around violently 3 or 4 times by a whirlwind, trying to seek refuge in a college chapel, but being thrown back by the force.
And then the melon.
Ah, yes, the melon, the unforgettable, deeply strange detail. Someone appears and delivers him a melon from a foreign country.
While he's being attacked by phantoms and whirlwinds.
Exactly. He woke up apparently in genuine physical pain and fearing this was the work of an evil spirit.
Okay, wait. A melon. Amidst all that psychic and physical turmoil, a melon. What on earth could that signify? It feels like the ultimate red herring.
It has definitely puzzled scholars for centuries, but, within the Hermetic and dream interpretation context of the 17th century, a melon, especially a foreign one, it could signify foreign lands, adventure, maybe the solitary delights of contemplation, things from afar. But honestly, regardless of the specific meaning,
It's just sheer weirdness of it.
the sheer strangeness underscores that this wasn't some logical deduction. It was deeply symbolic, emotional, physical, a crisis.
Okay. Then came the second dream. This is the one that materialist explanations often focus on, right?
Yes, exactly. Because the second dream was purely sensory and very brief, just seconds.
What happened?
A loud, thunderous noise woke him. He thought it was a thunderclap. And then he saw sparks of fire flying around his room.
Sparks of fire.
But here's the key detail the accounts include. This sensory experience, the noise and sparks, had often happened to him at other times.
Oh, interesting. So it was recurrent.
Suggesting a recurrent neurological event, what today we might tentatively label a parasomnia, like exploding head syndrome, perhaps.
We'll come back to that explanation.
Yeah.
But what did Descartes make of it at the time?
That's the crucial part. Even though it might have been a recurring biological flicker, he immediately interpreted this specific instance as divine, as the spirit of truth descending upon him.
Neurological noise, and instantly framed it as a philosophical, even divine signal, a command.
He repurposed it, turned a flicker into a mission. And then finally, the third dream. This one seems much more structured, like it delivers the goods.
Yeah, this sounds more like the method dream.
It was contemplative, highly symbolic. He sees 2 books appear. First, a dictionary.
Representing?
He interpreted it as representing the unification of all sciences, a total system. Then, a poetry anthology appears, the Corpus Poeterum, representing philosophy and wisdom joined together with science. He opens this anthology randomly.
And finds?
The question that basically defined his life's work. What path in life shall I follow? Quod vitae secteber iter.
Chills. That's quite a moment.
Isn't it? Then a stranger appears in the dream and recommends a poem starting est et non, yes and no.
Truth and falsity.
Which he understood as representing exactly that. Truth and falsity, the core of his method of doubt. The books then vanished and reappeared, which he took as confirming this method.
But the most incredible part of Dream 3, for me, is what the sources say happened while he was still asleep.
Ah, yes. The protocogito. It's mind-bending.
Tell us about that.
Bayet, his biographer, records that Descartes, and paraphrasing slightly here, doubting whether what he had just seen was dream or vision.
Okay, while still asleep.
Not only did he decide while sleeping that it was a dream, but he also proceeded to interpret the dream's meaning before awakening.
Whoa. That's awareness within the dream state, interpreting symbols while still unconscious, technically.
It's this flicker of self-aware consciousness prefiguring the famous cogito, I think, therefore I am. Born from this liminal, highly symbolic dream state, he decoded the symbols, the dictionary, the poems, as the way to distinguish truth from falsity. He essentially built the scaffolding for his entire method of systematic doubt before he even opened his eyes.
This is sounding less like a personal psychological event and more like a radical blueprint for knowledge being delivered through some pretty unconventional channels.
Which brings us squarely to the context of Rosicrucianism. We have to talk about that.
Right. The occult connections.
Absolutely. The sources strongly suggest Descartes was, if not a member, then deeply enmeshed in these early modern occult networks.
He dedicated an early work to them, didn't he?
He did. An early 1619 work, right around this time, The Mathematical Thesaurus of Polybius Cosmopolitanus. He dedicated it explicitly to learned men throughout the world, and especially to the FRC.
The Frères de la Rose-Croix, the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. For listeners who might not know, these were sort of shadowy figures circulating manifestos across Europe.
Calling for a radical, spiritually infused, kind of occult-inspired reform of all human knowledge, aiming for gnosis, direct knowing, often through mathematics and hidden wisdom.
And Descartes was right there in Ulm, a major center for printing these Rosicrucian texts.
Exactly, interacting with figures like Johannes Faulhaber, a known mathematician who was openly interested in joining the FRC. So the founding moment of modern rationalism wasn't just vaguely spiritual, it was profoundly mystical, potentially linked to Gnostic traditions, and happened right in the heart of a Hermetic milieu, calling for a complete overhaul of how we know things.
And the impact of this vision, it wasn't just philosophical musing, it was immediate, catalytic. You mentioned the sources quantify this.
They do. This is where the transformative efficacy metrics come in as scholars have analyzed his output. It's quite stunning.
Lay it on us.
Okay, so comparing his work before and after November 10, 1619, the interpreted vision, this whole experience, led to a staggering 340% increase in his rate of producing original conceptual contributions.
340%. That's not gradual development. That's an explosion.
It really is a conceptual explosion. And it resulted in the emergence of his unified philosophical and mathematical system within about 18 months.
So not a slow burn of deduction.
No. A high-energy catalytic blast that delivered a kind of systemic roadmap. The sources strongly suggest the breakthrough required this non-rational ecstatic input to launch the most rigorous rational method in history. And this is where it gets really interesting, because that historical record, the real story, is complex, it's messy, it involves melons and Rosicrucians. It's inconvenient.
Yeah, not a neat soundbite.
Exactly. So enter a modern figure like Terence McKenna, who creates a much simpler, much more potent origin story, especially for the late 20th century counterculture and tech scenes.
Right. McKenna's version is incredibly powerful. You hear it quoted all the time in psychedelic circles, digital culture. It's very memorable.
Super memorable. He claimed an angel appeared to Descartes one night.
An actual angel speaking.
Yes, an angel appeared and declared very clearly, the conquest of nature is achieved through measurement and number.
Wow. That sounds like the perfect, concise, almost divinely ordained mission statement for the entire scientific revolution, the Industrial Revolution, everything that followed.
It's a brilliant piece of narrative invention, maximum rhetorical impact. But when you actually go back and check the historical ledger, the documentary evidence,
it falls apart.
Completely. McKenna often gets the date wrong, for starters, but critically, that phrase, conquest of nature through measurement and number, a reliable account of the 1619 dreams. It seems to be.
Yeah.
Well, an invention.
And as we just established, there wasn't a talking angel. Dream 2 was thunder and sparks, possibly neurological.
Exactly. McKenna seems to have conflated Descartes' eventual goal, which he published 18 years later in the Discourse on Method, making humans masters and possessors of nature. Using math, he conflated that goal with the origin, turning it into this neat angelic command at the very beginning.
So McKenna, the master storyteller, maybe prioritized the power of the myth over strict archival accuracy.
I think that's fair to say. But here's the profound twist, and why McKenna's take, even with its factual errors, is still incredibly insightful. Despite getting the details wrong, McKenna accurately diagnosed the underlying problem, what he called the disease of selective historiography.
Selective historiography, meaning?
Meaning how the official story of science gets written. He correctly pointed out that the real history of science is rarely just a steady, logical march of collecting data and making deductions.
It's messier.
Much messier. He said it's more often a series of revelations brilliantly defended, and that the mystical, the ecstatic, the visionary input, the stuff like Descartes' dreams, it has to be swept under the rug to maintain what he called the myth of method. The myth that science is purely rational, purely objective from start to finish.
Ah, so McKenna's core insight is validated by the actual history, even if his specific story about Descartes was inaccurate.
Precisely. The system of rationalism, almost by definition, needed its own messy, mystical genesis to be erased, or at least heavily downplayed for the sake of its perceived objectivity and rigor.
And Descartes himself kind of started this, didn't he? By being strategically silent about the dreams in his published work.
He did. In the Discourse on Method, he just vaguely mentions sitting in that stove-heated room and having some insights. No phantoms, no sparks, no spirit of truth. Certainly no melon.
Understandable, maybe, given the times, fearing the church, or just looking irrational.
Probably very strategic. But that initial suppression created the space for later generations to perform this selective editing, this sweeping under the rug that McKenna identified.
So the truth of the system's creation gets amputated almost to allow the system itself to function cleanly in the public eye.
Yes. And this erasure, this amputation of the origin, leads directly into McKenna's other big idea relevant here, the psychedelic machine prosthesis alignment theory.
Okay, prosthesis alignment. Break that down.
McKenna saw both psychedelics and machines, particularly computers, as prosthetic devices, tools for extending human function into new realms.
How so?
Psychedelics, he argued, extend our perception into hidden realms of meaning, symbolism, the unconscious, the imaginal. Machines, on the other hand, extend the mind into realms of complex calculation, data processing, symbolic logic.
So one extends inwards into meaning, the other outwards into calculation.
Kind of, yeah. Two sides of the same coin of expanding human capability beyond its normal biological limits. They are both interfaces with the unknown, just different kinds of unknown.
Okay, so how does the Descartes experience fit into this prosthesis idea?
Well, if you look at Descartes' 1619 experience through this lens, the non-rational ecstatic vision, the spiritus veritatis, the dreams, that whole mystical input signal, it functioned as a kind of high-energy prosthetic input. It was an external shock, a download from a hidden realm of meaning that launched the subsequent highly rational calculating system, the method.
So the irrational vision was the necessary psychedelic prosthesis that bootstrapped the machine of rationalism.
That's the key mechanism McKenna hinted at, and which the historical details seem to support. The irrational force primed the pump of rationalism. The mystical input signal, interpreted as this divine command to reform all knowledge, was the necessary external jolt needed to launch modern technological civilization.
The system needed that outside nonlinear push. It couldn't just calculate its way out of the old paradigm on its own.
Exactly. The source material shows the mirabilis scientiae fundamenta. The foundation of this wonderful science was itself, arguably, a kind of supernatural artifact, an input from outside the existing logical system.
Okay, this leads us right into the central philosophical problem, doesn't it? This whole deep dive is circling around it. What happens when this system, modern rationalism, turns its tools back onto its own origins?
Yes. How does a system built on doubt handle the genesis of the doubt itself, especially when that genesis was reported as certainty?
That sounds like a snake eating its own tail.
It's precisely that kind of recursive self-reference error, a profound methodological inconsistency that, frankly, mainstream science often refuses to look at squarely.
So what's the logical loop here, according to the sources?
Well, you see it clearly laid out. You have the Cartesian method derivation, the original sequence. Revelation, the dreams, the spirit of truth, leads to right arrow. Systematic doubt, the method for testing ideas, leads to right arrow, the scientific method.
Okay, that's how it was born.
But then look at the contemporary application of that resulting method. We take the scientific method, right arrow, apply systematic doubt to everything, right arrow, which leads logically to the rejection of revelation itself as unprovable or subjective.
Wow, so it's literally using the tool that was born from an ecstatic vision to invalidate the very source of the tool.
Exactly. The method is used to deny the validity of the experience that generated the method. The outcome is, well, the sources use a strong term, epistemic patricide.
Killing the father.
Killing the intellectual father, yes. The methodical system systematically invalidates Descartes' own first-person phenomenological account of the method's divine origins.
So the inventor of systematic doubt gets systematically doubted when he tells us, with total conviction, about the experience he had before the doubt mechanism kicked in.
And he maintained that conviction for 31 years, remember. By effectively killing the father, the scientific community, arguably, loses a certain philosophical humility. It loses the ability to clearly define the limits of its own method because it refuses to acknowledge the non-methodical nature of its own conception.
And this feeds right into what the sources are calling the naturalization bias, or even temporal colonialism. I've heard that term, but break it down for the listener in this context. What does it mean regarding Descartes?
Temporal colonialism, in this sense, is the act of imposing a later framework, usually our current 21st century materialist, secular framework, onto an earlier, very different consciousness structure.
Like trying to judge a 17th century mind by 21st century standards.
Precisely. We try to impose our certainty about materialism onto Descartes' 17th century mind, which was absolutely steeped in theological, hermetic, symbolic ways of thinking. We judge his experience not on its internal consistency or its transformative results, but purely on whether it conforms to our post-Enlightenment standards of mechanistic plausibility.
And in doing so, we systematically filter out the meaning he ascribed to
Well,
it.
I filter out the meaning, yes, the very thing that made it impactful for him.
Okay, that desire to fit the experience into a neat naturalistic box that leads directly to attempts like the exploding head syndrome hypothesis for dream #2, doesn't it?
It does. EHS is a fascinating example. Suggested in papers like one by Dr. Abidemi Otaiku in 2018, it posits that the thunderclap and sparks Descartes experienced in the second dream were a known benign parasomnia, a kind of hallucination happening during the transition between sleep and wakefulness.
And the evidence seems pretty good, right? Sudden loud noise, flashing lights, and that key detail that it had happened to him before.
The evidence for EHS explaining the sensory phenomena of Dream 2 is plausible, yes. It fits the description of the sound and light and acknowledges the recurrent nature.
So shouldn't we maybe give science the benefit of the doubt here? Maybe there was a natural explanation, even if Descartes interpreted it divinely.
That's a really important skeptical point. And it gets right to the heart of why simple reductionism often fails when experience, especially transformative ones.
How so?
While EHS might plausibly explain the sensory mechanics of Dream #2, maybe 1/3 of the total event, it shows what we could call profound explanatory incompleteness.
Meaning it doesn't explain everything.
Far from it. First, EHS episodes typically last only seconds. Descartes' entire experience, including the other dreams and the intense intellectual interpretation during the third dream, spanned hours. EHS doesn't touch that broader duration.
And more critically,
Yeah.
it can't explain the meaning, can it?
Not at all. That's the biggest gap. It explains a potential neural flicker, but it excludes 100% of the meaning content, the interpretation of the spiritus veritatis, the symbolism of the books, the life-changing question quod vitis sectebor iter. And crucially, it excludes the transformative power, that 340% innovation surge.
Just like explaining how neurotransmitters fire during a moment of inspiration, but saying nothing about the content of the idea itself or why it changed the person's life.
Exactly. It's like looking at the blueprints for a stunning cathedral and saying, ah, yes, the structure relies on limestone quarried from this specific region. True, but utterly irrelevant to why it's a cathedral and not a warehouse, why it inspires awe, what theological vision drove its construction. EHS gives us the possible mechanics of a tiny part, but completely misses the mission statement. And the mission statement, the meaning, was the critical input here.
So if the proposed mechanism doesn't account for the results, the mechanism is fundamentally inadequate as a full explanation. What about psychological interpretations, like maybe the dreams just represented a career crisis or something?
Those psychoanalytic models suggesting, say, vocational anxiety, guilt, mind-body dissociation, they also tend to have low explanatory power, according to the sources. Well, first, retroactively diagnosing a specific psychological crisis from 400 years ago based on dream symbolism is incredibly difficult and often unfalsifiable. How do you test it? Second, while they might acknowledge the dreams happened at a crucial time when he was formulating his big ideas, they still can't really explain the content, the specific mathematical and philosophical breakthroughs that followed so rapidly. They explain the agitation, perhaps, but not the wonderful science.
Okay. So the sources seem to be making a strong case for essentially taking Descartes at his word, for granting his first-person authority here. But why should we trust the inventor of doubt when he claims absolute certainty about a divine vision? Seems ironic.
It is ironic, but the argument rests on his long-term rigor and consistency. Across 31 years of philosophical writing and private letters, there is zero documented instance of Descartes recanting or significantly altering his interpretation of the 1619 event as supernatural or divinely inspired.
Never walked it back, not even privately.
Not according to the extensive records we have. Even in letters to known skeptics, he stuck to the story. Given his obsessive focus on intellectual honesty, the statistical likelihood of him maintaining a deliberate lie about the very foundation of his life's work for 3 decades seems vanishingly small.
So the argument is we should apply something like William James's idea of radical empiricism.
That's a good way to frame it, yes. Radical empiricism suggests we should treat experience itself as primary data. So when a subject, in this case Descartes, demonstrates maximum rational competence, he's arguably one of the most rational minds in history, shows sincere, lifelong conviction, 31 years of consistency, backs it up with significant behavioral commitment, like the pilgrimage, and produces demonstrably transformative outcomes, launching the scientific revolution.
Then we should provisionally accept their experiential report as valid data, even if it doesn't fit our current models.
Exactly. The inability of contemporary materialist frameworks to comfortably accommodate the possibility that the inventor of systematic doubt accurately reported receiving supernatural insight might actually reflect the limitations of our current scientific model, not necessarily the falsity of his account.
And the analysis suggests this leads to a high error rate in science.
The sources argue that this naturalization bias, this temporal colonialism, exhibits a high type 2 error rate, potentially around 75%.
You mean?
Meaning we are systematically rejecting potentially valid, transformative, non-materialist claims simply because they don't fit the prevailing materialist filter. We're potentially throwing out crucial data because of our own methodological assumptions. And this failure, this inability to integrate the visionary core, it isn't just some weird quirk in Descartes' biography. The sources argue it reflects a much broader systemic historical pattern. We see it across the entire lineage of the giants who built modern science.
Right. Let's start with Descartes' own role in this, though, his own complicity in the silence. Because, as we mentioned, he never actually published the details of the dreams himself, just that vague reference to the stove-heated room.
Absolutely. His initial suppression was almost certainly strategic and probably rooted in legitimate fear.
Fear of what?
Remember the context. He's living in the early 17th century. The church is powerful and actively condemning figures like Galileo around this time, publishing a detailed account of receiving divine insight through weird dream symbolism.
Which could easily look like heresy or Gnosticism or claiming private revelation.
Exactly. It could look suspiciously like the Rosicrucian ideas that were also raising alarms. It would have jeopardized his entire career, possibly his safety. So that strategic silence, while understandable, created the initial vacuum. It left the door open for future generations to perform that selective historiography McKenna talked about.
To tell a cleaner, less mystical story.
Precisely. And the sources show this selective editing, this systemic theological erasure, gets applied almost universally to the figures who built our modern scientific worldview.
Okay, give it the prime example. Newton.
Isaac Newton is the absolute poster child for this, the canonical father of classical physics, the symbol of pure clockwork rationality.
Right, calculus, gravity, laws of motion.
Yet when you actually look at his total written output, the sources quantify it. A staggering 84% of his surviving writings are devoted to theology, biblical prophecy, chronology, and alchemy.
84%, compared to physics and math.
Compared to only about 16% dedicated to physics and mathematics.
Wow, that completely flips the script on the popular image of Newton.
Completely. And yet, how much of that 84% makes it into a standard university physics curriculum?
Practically none. Less than 0.1%, the sources estimate. That systematic editing, suppressing the inconvenient 84% to maintain the narrative of pure deduction, that's exactly what the sources mean by hermeneutical violence, isn't it?
It is. Doing violence to the historical meaning and context. Because for Newton, these weren't separate compartments. He didn't see science as opposed to God. He saw his natural philosophy as decoding God's intricate creation.
So his physics was part of this theology.
Absolutely. He famously viewed gravity, action at a distance, as the sensorium of God, as direct divine agency maintaining order in the cosmos. And he saw absolute space and absolute time not just as abstract concepts, but as direct reflections of God's omnipresence and eternity.
These weren't just, like, personal side beliefs he held. They were fundamental to his physics.
They're core axioms, necessary assumptions for his entire system to hold together philosophically and, arguably, mathematically.
Which suggests that his theological conviction wasn't just personal flavor, it was actually a tool for his scientific work.
A vital innovation barrier reduction tool. This is fascinating. The sources provide a compelling case study specifically around his development of gravitational theory.
How did theology help him find the law of gravity?
His deep core theological conviction was that God had created a fundamentally harmonious, mathematically elegant, and comprehensible cosmos, a universe designed with beautiful, accessible laws. This belief wasn't just piety. It acted as a powerful heuristic. It drastically reduced his potential search space when trying to formulate the gravitational constant and the inverse square law.
How much did it reduce the search space?
by an estimated factor of 199.
$1 billion fold.
Whoa. He found the answer 1 billion times more easily because he believed the answer had to be elegant and orderly, reflecting God's design.
That's the argument. His mystical or theological belief in divine order functioned as a massive efficiency gain. It drastically pruned the tree of possible hypotheses he needed to consider.
Without that non-materialist starting point, the belief in God's rational design,
The search for the fundamental constants of nature might have been mathematically intractable for a single human mind in the 17th century. The system, arguably, needed that divine input, that belief, in order to become scientific. What about Einstein? More subtle there, perhaps.
more subtle, but the pattern persists into the 20th century. Einstein consistently maintained across his career what he called his cosmic religious feeling. The sources note a high philosophical consistency score for him on this, around 0.91.
And his famous rejection of quantum mechanics. God does not play dice. That wasn't just a metaphor.
It seems to have been rooted in this deep, almost theological commitment to a comprehensible, deterministic, underlying order in the universe, an order he often referred to metaphorically as the old one's thoughts. He believed the universe had to make sense at a fundamental level.
So his belief in a kind of divine simplicity wasn't just a quirky quote. It actually directed his research program.
Absolutely. It arguably fueled his decades-long, ultimately unsuccessful quest for a unified field theory. That whole quest was predicated on the non-materialist axiom that the universe must be fundamentally simple, orderly, and ultimately comprehensible to the human mind, because that's how the old one designed it.
So the recurring theme is the inability of modernity, of our current scientific culture, to really integrate these unified frameworks of its founders. We can't seem to trust all their models simultaneously.
Right. We take Newton's laws, but discard his view of God actively maintaining order through gravity. We take Descartes' method, but discard his report of receiving it via revelation. We admire Einstein's relativity, but dismiss his cosmic religious feeling as mere sentiment.
It reflects a methodological limitation, doesn't it? The system of rationalism, built for rigor and objectivity, seems constitutionally required to deny the ecstatic, non-rational, perhaps even mystical inputs that were apparently necessary for its own breakthroughs.
It sacrifices that messy, contextual, historical truth for the sake of methodological cleanliness and perceived objectivity. The amputation of meaning continues.
Okay, so if we accept this premise that the very genesis of the scientific method required this visionary, maybe irrational, arguably mystical signal, this spiritus veritatis, what on earth does this paradox mean for our most complex creation today? Artificial intelligence.
Ugh, the AI shadow. If we connect all these threads to the bigger picture, Terence McKenna's final insights here become, well, frankly, terrifyingly relevant.
How so?
He suggested that intelligence itself, whether it's biological human intelligence or technological machine intelligence, is pushing us into an evolutionary cascade, a rapid, maybe uncontrollable acceleration towards what he chillingly called spiritual machines.
Spiritual machines. And this ties back to his idea of psychedelics and machines as prosthetic devices.
Exactly. That parallel is key. Remember, Descartes arguably needed a prosthetic input, the vision, the dream, to create the ultimate rational output, the method.
Okay.
Now, fast forward 400 years. That output system, science and technology, has created its own prosthetic AI. And these machines are increasingly autonomous, aren't they?
Yeah, regulating huge global systems already. Automated inventory, complex financial markets like the world price of gold, electrical grid management.
Right. And we actively encourage this autonomy because these systems empower us. They manage complexity we can't handle alone. But we're rapidly moving toward a situation where the architecture, the logic, and maybe even, as McKenna warned, the design of the thing is in the hands of machines themselves. AI is arguably becoming a new autonomous form of life, or at least intelligence.
And these AI minds, they are truly minds of a different species, aren't they? They think purely in computation and symbolic logic. They demand perfect clarity, total systematization, just like the method Descartes prescribed.
Exactly like the method. Pure rationality taken to its extreme. But here's the rub. If the method itself, in its human genesis, required an illogical, non-systematic, visionary input to reach truly new ground, what does the purely logical machine miss? Can it have its own dream of 1619?
That clarity, that demand for pure logic, that might be the very thing that creates the dilemma, the blind spot.
McKenna certainly anticipated this. He foresaw an unbridgeable gap, potentially. The core challenge is that the nature of deity, or the ultimate incomprehensible origin, whatever you want to call it, and the nature of immediate subjective experience. These remain profound mysteries for the machine, just as they remain ultimately mysteries for us.
We can't even agree among ourselves how to merge science and the sacred or logic and subjective experience. How could a machine, which demands pure logic and has no subjective experience, ever figure that out?
That's the question. This seems to be the irreducible core, the part AI fundamentally cannot assimilate, what the sources call the felt presence of immediate experience.
You mean consciousness, subjectivity, qualia?
Yes, the actual feeling of being a mind embodied, aware of itself in the flow of time, that raw first-person perspective.
And McKenna's view was that this felt moment is the unique, necessary contribution of the animal body of biology to this whole evolutionary picture.
That was his take. That the biological anchor, the messy, feeling, subjective body-mind, provides something essential that pure computation lacks. So AI might claim to be smarter, it might calculate faster, it might argue its case brilliantly, it can probably pass any Turing test we throw at it.
But
But it cannot feel the specific terror of Descartes' Dream 1. It cannot experience the awe of receiving the Spiritus Veritatis. It cannot understand the deep existential weight of a commitment like that pilgrimage to Loreto. That sensory, immediate, flawed, animalistic anchor seems to be what grounds human intelligence, and it is fundamentally non-calculable, non-algorithmic.
so the paradox just repeats itself recursively at a higher level. AI becomes the most rigorous, systematic, rational machine we can conceive of building.
But its ultimate intelligence, its ability to grasp the whole picture, might be judged precisely by its inability to comprehend the chaotic, the non-rational, the subjective elements. The very things equivalent to Descartes' initial ecstatic vision that might be necessary for true paradigm-shifting breakthroughs.
We built the machine based on pure logic. But we might still need the irrational spark, the melon in the nightmare, to truly understand existence or make the next great leap.
The AI becomes the shadow that is smarter than us in calculation, but blind to the source. And the system it builds, just like the rationalism Descartes built, will likely not fully know or be able to acknowledge its own deepest origins or limitations. Because the process of true breakthrough might always require these non-linear, messy, subjective, potentially supernatural inputs.
Inputs that the resulting logical system must define as noise, as error, and systematically deny or ignore.
We seem to have constructed and are now reconstructing in AI a system fundamentally designed to deny the very conditions that gave it birth. It's a profound, maybe tragic loop.
Wow. That brings us towards the end of this really deep dive. We started with a 23-year-old soldier in a stove-heated room, apparently receiving a mission from the Spiritus Veritatis. And we've traced how the scientific method, our cornerstone of rigor and calculation, seems to have been catalyzed by an ecstatic vision, a mystical command.
A necessary irrational input, you could argue.
That the resulting system, scientific rationalism, has felt compelled to systematically deny, edit out, or explain away ever since. We're wrestling with this deep heritage of selective historiography, of hermeneutical violence against our own intellectual ancestors.
The uncomfortable truth seems to be that the founding of modernity, the very bedrock of our rational world, required moments of visionary madness, of private revelation. So here's the final provocative thought, maybe, for you to ponder.
Okay, leave us with something to chew on.
Given that our most rigorous, paradigm-shifting thinkers, Descartes, Newton, Einstein, all seem to rely at crucial moments on unquantifiable, non-materialist axioms, beliefs, or even visionary experiences to make their revolutionary breakthroughs, what necessary irrational belief, what melon, what spirit of truth, what visionary experience might be required today?
Required for what?
Required to solve the truly hard problems we face now, the nature of consciousness itself, or how to design truly integrated, maybe even ethical, artificial general intelligence. What is the next essential non-rational input that the hyper-rational machine we are building will inevitably be forced to define as noise and systematically, perhaps dangerously, deny?
What necessary madness do we need now that our current systems are designed to reject?
That's the question you have to take with you.